This happened to me in October 2023, and I still can't explain it. I'm 26, work in software development, and I've been camping solo for about 5 years now. I'm not someone who scares easily, and I've spent plenty of nights alone in the wilderness without incident. Until this trip. I decided to camp at a spot in the Appalachian Mountains, about 2 hours from where I live in North Carolina. It's not an official campground, just a clearing I'd found on a previous hike. Remote, quiet, exactly what I needed to disconnect for a weekend. I arrived Friday afternoon around 3 p.m. The weather was perfect. Cool but not cold, clear skies, that crisp autumn air that makes you feel alive. I set up my tent in the same spot I'd used before, a flat area surrounded by tall pines about 50 yards from a small stream. The first thing I always do after setting up camp is walk the perimeter. Just a safety thing, checking for dead trees that might fall, animal signs, that kind of stuff. Everything looked normal. I made a mental note of the area around my tent. Pine needles, some scattered leaves, a few rocks here and there. Nothing unusual. I spent the rest of the afternoon hiking, exploring some trails I hadn't been on before. Got back to camp around 6 p.m., started a fire, cooked dinner. One of those freeze-dried camping meals, nothing fancy. I sat by the fire for a few hours, reading on my Kindle, occasionally looking up at the stars. It was peaceful, perfect even. Around 10 p.m., I decided to call it a night. I put out the fire properly, made sure everything was secured, and climbed into my tent. I always sleep with my phone on airplane mode when camping, but I keep it nearby in case of emergencies. I fell asleep pretty quickly. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what woke me. No noise, no movement, just suddenly awake. With that feeling you get when something isn't right. You know that feeling? When your brain registers something before you consciously realize what it is. I checked my phone. 3:47 a.m. I listened for a few minutes. Nothing. Just the normal sounds of the forest at night. Wind in the trees, the distant sound of the stream. I almost went back to sleep. But then I noticed the light was different. Moonlight was filtering through my tent in a way that seemed off. The shadows were strange. I unzipped my tent and looked outside. That's when I saw them. Stones. About 30 of them, arranged in a perfect circle around my tent. Each stone roughly the size of a football, evenly spaced, forming a circle maybe 10 feet in diameter with my tent at the center. I sat there, staring for a solid minute, trying to process what I was seeing. These stones were not there when I went to sleep. I was certain of that. I'd walked around my tent before getting in. I would have noticed a perfect circle of stones. My first thought was that someone was messing with me. But I was miles from the nearest road, in the middle of nowhere, on a Friday night. Who would hike all the way out here just to arrange stones around a stranger's tent? I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The stones were real, obviously. Solid, heavy river rocks. I bent down and tried to lift one. It took both hands. Each stone probably weighed 20 to 30 pounds. 30 stones. That's 600 to 900 pounds of rock that someone, or multiple people, had carried and arranged around my tent while I slept. Here's what really disturbed me. The stones were wet, not damp. Wet, like they'd just been pulled from the stream. But the ground around them was completely dry. No tracks, no drag marks, no indication of how they got there. I shined my flashlight into the woods in every direction. Nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting back at me, no sound, just darkness and trees. But I had this overwhelming feeling of being watched. You know when you can just feel eyes on you? It was like that, but intensified. I didn't go back into my tent. I couldn't. The idea of zipping myself back into that nylon box surrounded by these stones felt wrong in a way I can't fully explain. Instead, I sat with my back against a tree, about 30 feet away, flashlight in one hand, my knife in the other, and waited for sunrise. Nothing happened for the rest of the night. No sounds, no movement, no additional stones appearing. Just me, sitting there in the dark, watching my tent and that circle of stones. When the sun finally came up around 6:30 a.m., I packed up as quickly as I could. The whole time I was packing, I kept looking at those stones. In daylight, they looked even more deliberate, perfectly spaced, all roughly the same size, arranged with precision. This wasn't random. This was intentional. Before I left, I took photos, lots of them. Wide shots showing the circle, close-ups of individual stones, photos of the wet stones against the dry ground. I wanted evidence that I wasn't losing my mind. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have done. I kicked one of the stones, breaking the circle. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to disrupt whatever purpose they served. Maybe I was just angry and scared and needed to do something. The stone rolled a few feet and came to rest against a tree. That's when I noticed something underneath, where the stone had been. A small depression in the ground, maybe an inch deep, perfectly circular, like the stone had been there for days, pressed into the earth. But that was impossible. The ground had been flat when I set up my tent the previous afternoon. I left, didn't even finish packing properly, just threw everything in my car and drove out of there. For the next few weeks, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd been drugged somehow, and the stones were there all along. But I had photos from when I arrived that showed the area around my tent. No stones. Maybe it was an elaborate prank. But the logistics didn't make sense. The weight of the stones, the precision of the arrangement, the fact that they were wet, but the ground was dry. About a month later, I was browsing a folklore subreddit, just killing time, when I came across a post about something called fairy circles, or stone circles. Apparently, in various cultures, stone circles around a dwelling are meant to trap whatever is inside, or protect whatever is outside from whatever is inside. The post mentioned that in some Appalachian folklore, stone circles were placed around areas where something had died to prevent it from returning, or where something was buried to keep it contained. I went back through my photos from that trip, zooming in on the area around my tent. In one photo, taken in the afternoon when the light was good, I noticed something I'd missed before. About 20 feet from where I'd set up my tent, there was a slight depression in the ground, maybe 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, almost like a grave. I showed the photo to a friend who studies geology. She said the depression could be natural, caused by a rotting tree stump or erosion. But she also said the way the surrounding earth had settled suggested the depression had been there for a long time, decades, maybe longer. I never went back to that campsite. I've been camping since, but only in official campgrounds with other people around. I've tried to forget about it, to convince myself it was just a weird coincidence or a prank I didn't understand. But sometimes, late at night, I think about those stones, how heavy they were, how wet they were despite the dry ground, how precisely they were arranged. And I think about that depression in the earth, 20 feet from where I slept. And I wonder, was the circle meant to keep something away from me? Or was it meant to keep me in one place, so something could find me? I still don't know. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to. I'm sharing this story because my daughter asked me to. She's 19 now, but when this happened, she was 16. She says writing it down and sharing it might help her process it. Honestly, I don't think either of us will ever fully process what happened that night. It was July 2022. My daughter Emma had just finished her sophomore year of high school. She'd been going through a tough time, friend drama, academic pressure, the usual teenage struggles amplified by social media and pandemic anxiety. I wanted to do something to help her decompress, to remind her that life existed outside of screens and social pressures. I suggested a camping trip, just the two of us, father-daughter time. She wasn't enthusiastic at first, but she agreed. We settled on a spot at a state park about an hour from our home in Pennsylvania. It had hiking trails, a lake, actual bathrooms. Not exactly wilderness survival, but enough to feel like we were getting away. We arrived Saturday morning around 10 a.m. The campground was about half full. Families with kids, a few couples, some solo campers. Everyone seemed friendly, that typical campground atmosphere where strangers wave to each other. We set up our tent in a spot that felt private but not isolated. Trees on 3 sides, a path to the bathrooms about 50 yards away. The day was perfect. We hiked, we talked, we sat by the lake. Emma even put her phone away for most of it. At dinner, while we were cooking hot dogs over the fire, she actually laughed. Like, genuinely laughed, in a way I hadn't heard in months. It felt like a breakthrough. As it got dark, we made s'mores and talked about everything and nothing. Other campers had their own fires going. We could hear distant conversations, kids playing, someone strumming a guitar. It felt safe, normal. Around 10 p.m., most of the campground had quieted down. Emma wanted to stay up a bit longer, so we kept the fire going and just sat there, looking at the stars. It was one of those perfect moments where you're just present, you know? No worries about tomorrow, just being there with your kid, grateful for the time together. That's when we heard it. My voice, calling Emma's name. But I wasn't calling her name. I was sitting right there next to her. It came from the woods behind our campsite. Emma. Clear as day. In my voice. My exact voice. Same tone I'd used to get her attention. Emma looked at me confused. Did you just call me? I shook my head. That wasn't me. We sat there in silence, listening. Nothing for maybe 30 seconds. Then it came again. Emma. Closer this time. Still my voice. Dad, this isn't funny, Emma said. But she could see I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't moving my lips, wasn't using some voice app on my phone. Then we heard Emma's voice. Dad, where are you? It came from a different direction, off to our left, deeper in the woods. It sounded exactly like Emma. The same slight hesitation she has, the same way she draws out the word where. But Emma was sitting right next to me and she hadn't said anything. What the hell is this? I said, standing up. Emma grabbed my arm hard. Don't go toward it, she whispered. My voice called again, from yet another direction now. Emma, come here. Then Emma's voice from behind us. Dad, help me. This went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 5 or 10 minutes. Our voices, calling to each other from different spots in the woods. Sometimes my voice would call Emma from 2 different directions at once. Sometimes Emma's voice would say things she'd never say, using words she didn't use. Other campers must have heard it too, because we saw flashlights starting to move around the campground. Someone shouted, "Who's out there?" But no one answered. Just more voices. A man's voice calling a woman's name, a child's voice saying, "Mommy," over and over. But none of the voices belonged to anyone in the campground. Then, almost as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Complete silence. No voices, no movement. Even the normal forest sounds seemed to have disappeared. No crickets, no wind, nothing. Emma and I stayed by the fire. We didn't go into our tent. We didn't talk much. We just sat there, keeping the fire going, waiting for sunrise. Other campers had the same idea. I could see several fires that stayed burning all night, people sitting around them, nobody sleeping. When dawn finally came, the campground looked like a ghost town. About a third of the campers were already packing up and leaving. Nobody made eye contact. Nobody talked about what happened. People just packed their things in silence and left. Emma and I packed up too. As we were loading the car, an older man from a campsite near ours walked over. He was probably in his 70s, had that weathered look of someone who'd spent a lot of time outdoors. "You heard them too," he said. Not a question, a statement. I nodded. "The voices?" He looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "I've been camping here for 40 years. It happens sometimes, usually in July. Nobody talks about it, because nobody wants to sound crazy, but we all hear it." "What is it?" I asked. He shook his head. "Don't know. Some folks say it's the mountain. Something about the way sound carries, creates echoes that sound like voices. Some say it's spirits. Cherokee used to live in these parts long time ago, their stories." He paused. "Personally, I think it's something else. Something that lives out there, that learned to copy us, learned to sound like us." "Why would it do that?" Emma asked. She'd been quiet until then. The old man looked at her. "Same reason a fisherman uses bait, to lure you in." We left right after that conversation. Didn't stop for breakfast. didn't take the scenic route home. Just drove straight back to our house in silence. Emma and I talked about it once, a few days later. We agreed not to tell anyone. Who would believe us? And even if they did, what would we say? That we heard voices in the woods that sounded like us. It sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud, but here's what really bothers me, the part that keeps me up at night. When we got home and I was unpacking the car, I found Emma's phone in the cup holder. She'd left it there the whole time, never brought it to the campsite. I checked it. There were text messages from a number we didn't recognize, sent during the time we were at the campground. Time stamped at 10:47 p.m., right around when the voices started. The messages said, "Why won't you come? I'm calling you. Don't you hear me calling?" I showed Emma. She went pale. "I never gave anyone my number," she said. "And my phone was in the car the whole time." I checked the number. It wasn't a real number, just a string of random digits. When I tried to call it back, I got an error message saying the number didn't exist. We never went camping together again. Emma's in college now, doing well, but she won't go into the woods, not even for a short hike. She says she can't trust what she hears out there. And honestly, neither can I. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the house, I'll hear her voice calling me from upstairs. But when I check, she's not there. She's at school, hours away. And I wonder if whatever was in those woods followed us home. This happened 3 years ago, but I'm only now comfortable talking about it. 4 of us went camping, me, my girlfriend Sarah, and our friends Mike and Jessica. We were all in our mid-20s, adventurous types who'd been camping dozens of times before. This trip was supposed to be easy, a long weekend in the Ozarks, a well-known hiking area with established trails. We arrived Thursday afternoon and hiked about 3 miles to a campsite we'd researched online. It was perfect. A clearing next to a small waterfall, flat ground for tents, and a fire pit that looked like it had been used recently. Other campers had clearly stayed here before, which was reassuring. The first night was uneventful. We cooked dinner, told stories around the fire, made plans for the next day's hike. Normal camping stuff. We split into 2 tents, Sarah and I in one, Mike and Jessica in the other, pitched about 15 feet apart. Friday, we hiked 8 miles through beautiful terrain, exhausting but worth it. We got back to camp around 5 p.m., made dinner, and were in bed by 10. We were tired enough that we fell asleep immediately. I woke up to Sarah shaking me. It was pitch black, that complete darkness you only get when you're far from any lights. "Something's outside," she whispered. I listened. At first I didn't hear anything unusual. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not trying to be quiet, just walking in a circle around our tent. Steady, deliberate steps in the leaves and dirt. "Mike?" I called out. "That you?" The footsteps stopped. Silence for maybe 10 seconds. Then Mike's voice from his tent. "We're in here. We hear it too." The footsteps resumed. Closer now. Right outside our tent. I could see the shadow of something passing in front of the mesh window. Tall. At least 6.5 feet, maybe taller. The silhouette was wrong somehow. The proportions were off in a way I couldn't quite identify in the dark. Sarah grabbed my arm. "What do we do?" I didn't know. We had a small knife for cutting rope, nothing that would serve as a real weapon. Our phones had no signal. We were 3 miles from the nearest road. The footsteps continued for maybe 5 minutes, just circling our tents. Then they stopped. Complete silence. We waited, barely breathing. Then we heard a sound that made my blood run cold. A voice, but not quite a voice. More like someone trying to imitate human speech without quite understanding how it works. It said, "Hello." The word was stretched out, the syllables in the wrong places. Hello. Like someone had heard the word, but was pronouncing it phonetically, getting the sounds right, but not the rhythm. Mike shouted from his tent, "Who are you? What do you want?" Another long silence. Then, "Camping. Are you camping?" Again, the words were technically correct, but delivered wrong. No inflection, no natural pauses. It sounded like a very advanced robot, or something that had learned to speak by listening, but never quite understood the emotional component of language. Sarah was crying quietly beside me. I was trying to figure out what to do. Run? Toward what? We were in the middle of nowhere. Fight? With what? Against something we couldn't see clearly? Then it spoke again, and what it said made everything worse. I live here. Why are you in my home? The thing was, we weren't in anyone's home. This was public land, a designated camping area. But the way it said home, with that same mechanical inflection, made me realize something disturbing. Whatever this was, it had been here first. Long before the trails, long before the campsites. And we had pitched our tents right in the middle of wherever it stayed. Mike made a decision. He unzipped his tent and turned on his flashlight, shining it in the direction of the voice. I did the same, unzipping our tent and pointing my light into the darkness. At first we saw nothing, just trees and darkness. Then Mike adjusted his angle, pointing his light down toward the ground, and we saw it. There was a structure there. Not a building, not exactly. More like a shelter built into the ground, covered with leaves and branches and moss. It blended so perfectly with the forest floor that we'd walked right past it multiple times without noticing. The entrance was maybe 4 feet across, leading down into darkness. And standing in front of that entrance was something tall. The flashlight beams only caught parts of it. It moved too quickly for us to get a full look. But what we saw didn't make sense. The skin was wrong, too pale, almost gray. The limbs were too long, the joints bent in ways that didn't match human anatomy. But the worst part was the face. It turned toward our lights, and for just a second we saw it clearly. It was trying to look human. The features were all there, eyes, nose, mouth. But they were in slightly wrong positions, like a child's drawing of a person. The eyes too far apart, the mouth too wide, the nose almost flat. It spoke again. "You are in my home. Please leave my home." We didn't need to be told twice. All 4 of us scrambled out of our tents, grabbed what we could carry, and ran. We didn't follow the trail. We just ran in what we hoped was the direction of the parking area, our flashlights bouncing wildly, crashing through undergrowth. I don't know how long we ran. It felt like hours, but was probably 20 or 30 minutes. At some point, we found the trail and followed it back to the parking lot. We threw everything in the car and drove. We didn't stop until we were back in town at a 24-hour diner, sitting under bright lights around other people. We reported it to park rangers the next day. They listened politely, took notes, said they'd investigate. We gave them the exact location of our campsite. They called us back a week later and said they'd searched the area thoroughly. No structure, no shelter, no evidence of anyone or anything living there. They suggested we'd been disoriented in the dark, maybe saw a bear or a large deer, let our imaginations run wild. But all 4 of us saw the same thing. All 4 of us heard that voice, and when we got our tents and camping gear back from the rangers, there were scratches on the outside of all our tents. Deep scratches, like something with very long fingers had been testing the fabric, seeing how easily it would tear. We've talked about going back during daylight with more people to see if we can find that structure again, but we haven't done it, because all 4 of us have the same fear. What if we do find it? What if it's real, and what if the thing that lives there is still there, waiting for us to come back to its home? Mike did some research into the area. Turns out there have been reports for decades of people seeing something in those woods. Most reports are dismissed as misidentification of wildlife or hoaxes, but they're consistent, tall, pale, moving in ways that don't look quite right, speaking in broken English, asking people why they're in its home. There's one report from the 1970s that really stuck with me. A family was camping in that same area. Their 10-year-old son wandered off. They found him 3 hours later, sitting at the edge of the woods, crying. When they asked what happened, he said he'd met the man who lives under the ground. He said the man had shown him his home, a shelter built into the earth, filled with things the man had collected. Clothes, backpacks, camping gear, things from people who'd camped there before. The boy said the man had been very polite. He'd asked if the boy wanted to stay. When the boy said no, the man had walked him back to his campsite. But as the boy was leaving, the man had said something. "Tell them this is my home. Tell them to camp somewhere else." The family left immediately and never came back. The boy, now in his 50s, still won't talk about it in detail, but he did say one thing in an interview a few years ago. It wasn't human. It was trying very hard to be human, but it wasn't. I think about that a lot, about something living out there in the woods in the dark, in a shelter built into the ground, something old, maybe very old, something that learned to speak our language by listening to campers over the years, something that collects our belongings when we leave them behind, something that for the most part just wants to be left alone in its home. But what happens when we don't leave? What happens when we pitch our tents right on top of where it lives? I don't know, and I don't want to find out.